Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next edition of the webinar series that we host here at the Center for Professional Selling at Ball State University. I'm your host, Deva Rangarajan. I'm the director of the sales program. And today we have a very, very interesting speaker, Jeremey Donovan, who is the Senior Vice President of Sales Development, which is very relevant and pertinent to what we're going to be talking about at SalesLoft. For those of you who are being not aware of what SalesLoft does, I strongly urge you to go take a look at SalesLoft and what they do. It's an engagement platform for salespeople, especially inside sales reps, but I'm sure that the applications are far-reaching than just inside sales rep, SDRs and BDRs. So Jeremey, thank you so much for taking your time to talk to us today.
Thanks, Deva. Pleasure to be on the webinar.
Thank you so much. So Jeremey, one of the things you said, SVP, Senior Vice President of Sales Development. So what does your typical day look like? So what is it that you do as part of sales development?
Yeah, I've actually honored to have three roles, actually. So one of them is I am the head of sales development here. So that means we have our own STRs, sales development representatives, who are tasked with booking meetings for more senior sales executives. So that's one part of my responsibility. The second part of my responsibility is that our sales engineers here at SalesLoft roll up into me, and I have enjoy that part of my job as well. And then my third job is sales strategy, which means my best way to describe that is anytime there's a change that is more complex and cross-functional that requires heavy analytical load, then I'll get involved with those projects, project manage them, put whatever brain power I can into them, and then hand them off to other people to continue to execute and operate those.
Fantastic. But from what I hear you say, but actually everything is interconnected, right?
They are all interconnected. And I think on the sales strategy piece, I mean, that's the part where I think the interconnections are deepest, right? If you're going to change a comp plan, or if you're going to change an organizational structure, or if you're going to change territory strategy, like any of those changes are things that you have to really play the chess on to understand if I make this move, what's going to happen down the line to all of the other pieces of the organization.
Fantastic. Now that you mentioned this, let me ask you this. So this is a question you asked me earlier. That is, what is my favorite book on sales? Do you have a favorite book on sales management? I'm not talking about sales as in selling skills. I'm talking in terms of sales management.
Yeah, that's probably the easier question. I have so many favorite sales books. On sales management, I'll actually give you two. I had one that was my longtime favorite and is arguably one of the best books out there, called Cracking the Sales Management Code. And what I love about that book is that it just kind of very simply breaks down how you think about what managers have control over. So you start with business results that you actually don't have direct control over. But then in order to achieve those business results, there are some intermediate objectives that you need to accomplish. So if the business result, let's say, is revenue, then the intermediate result maybe is meetings held or pipeline opportunity, what have you. And then based on those intermediate results you want to create, then you figure out what activities you want done. And that's what sales managers actually have control over, is activity quality, or activity effectiveness, and then activity volume. That's really all outside of hiring, which is incredibly important. Those are the two levers once people are in the door that you actually have control over. So that's been perennially my favorite and most recommended sales management book. I'm reading right now, actually, Sales Manager's Survival Guide, which was recommended to me by one of our guests on the SalesLoft podcast. And I've been finding that really insightful. It's a slower read because it's got so much in there. And it's not like I could say there's any one thing that stands out in the same way I can with the Cracking the Sales Management Code, but it's just all kinds of tips and tools and tricks to be an effective sales manager.
In my opinion, the two books that I would also, if I can recommend anything to you at all, is in fact, Cracking the Sales Management Code is a wonderful book, but I think one step above that is a book called Building a Winning Sales Force. It's written by three people, Zoltners, Sinha, and Lorimer, and actually they are kind of the founders of one of the biggest sales consultancy firms, ZS Associates, and they're also faculty members at Kellogg. And in my opinion, they talk about the same thing as well. So the key thing, if you take a look at those books, especially the book on cracking the sales management code, it breaks down to activities, right? They talk about things that can be controlled. What I really like about building a winning sales force, which is something I think I would suggest that you read if you have some time. It's not an easy read, not as easy to read as cracking the sales management code, but you get a lot of insights because they break down how to manage the activities into 5 drivers. They talk about how should we go about setting up sales strategy, because the book on cracking the sales management code does not talk about strategy. It talks about activities and how do you manage it. But
Absolutely.
in your current role, and that one, it breaks down into, they call 5 drivers of Salesforce excellence. They talk about shapers, the definers. How do you define your sales strategy? How do you shape your sales organization? How do you keep the people excited? That's including your compensation plans and everything else. How do you enlighten them? That is your engagement. So, like, the nice thing about SalesLoft is you sell sales engagement software, but you also have to get your SDRs engaged as well. And then the last is what they call exciter. So the activities come under, in performance management, that is controllers. That's where you can control that. So if you want a deeper read, I would strongly suggest, and normally what I do is that I love that we're talking about this, because when I do this, I take the sales management code and I say activities and results, but then I take the processes, because the activities are defined by your processes. Essentially, the process for, let's say, for example, SDR is going to be quite different from an account executive. So
absolutely.
Which means that I need to define what that is. And I guess as part of sales strategy, the key is that when you start saying, okay, we're going to become bigger, we're going to scale up, and suddenly you're going to say, where am I going to allocate my resources? Then your processes is what is going to drive your sales force structure, which is then going to dictate the activity. So if I can make a recommendation, it's called Building a Winning Sales Force, which is absolutely brilliant. But the nice thing is it will play well with your book on cracking the sales management code.
Nice. I think it's one I might have to reread. I think it was one of the earlier sales books I read, because I have read, I know, at least 1 or 2 books by the ZS Associates folks. Yeah. I can't remember if that was the one or if there was another one, but I'll
they have 3.
Reread it.
They have another excellent book just on compensation plans. On compensation plans.
I read the compensation plan book. Yes, that was, I think, when I was revamping another company. I was revamping a comp plan. I think I read that in the process.
Indeed. So actually, when I go and train sales managers, I use the framework from cracking the sales management code, but I build it on top of the building the winning sales team as well. So again, that's something that I'll send you a separate note on that one. So now let me ask you this. So SalesLoft has seen a lot of growth. You see that sales engagement is becoming a buzzword. Let me first of all begin by asking, when you joined SalesLoft, where was it? You see what I mean? Was it a small organization that was scaling up fast, or did you already come in there when it was at that point where it was pretty scaled up already?
I would say it's probably in the excuse me, in the intermediate zone. We were about 200 people or so when I joined. I think we're 400, maybe a little bit north of 400 at this point. Wow. So we were definitely in that phase that you described, where we were going from the lightly defined processes to more rigorously defined processes. And the company has been growing at 100% plus per year every year for the past 3 or 4 years at least. So, when you're doing that, you really do need to start putting process discipline in place. I think your point earlier was so relevant. I mean, I was thinking earlier, actually yesterday, in fact, I was coaching an SDR whose activity volume is so high, but this person's activity effectiveness, right, the conversion rate of that activity into scheduled meetings was not as high. And to the point of process, I mean, one part of process is to make sure that, for example, every SDR makes a certain number of calls every single day. And that's I think of that as part of the process discipline amongst other pieces of it. And here, if that were the only thing, right, then that SDR would be succeeding. And yet, they just needed some leveling up, basically, on the effectiveness, which is also another process, right? The process by which that person engages in a phone call, or the process by which that person personalizes an email. So yeah, in the days way back when, people could be a little bit more entrepreneurial, quote unquote, about that, and you have to get a little bit more. You have to get more disciplined. It doesn't mean you take away, too much autonomy, but there is a degree of autonomy that begins to disappear And I'd add, I mean, I worked for multi-billion-dollar companies as well. And as you go from, the tens of millions to hundreds of millions to multiple billions of dollars, the processes in general get more and more and more like disciplined, and to some extent the autonomy and breadth of responsibility starts to decrease, which is actually one of the reasons why I've worked my way into smaller companies, because I love that breadth of responsibility.
Absolutely. No, for me, the reason why I'm talking is that most of the time when I talk to people, they're working for established organizations where the challenges are quite different from what you are. Because when you're going from 200 to 400, you're looking at almost monthly changes to headcount, monthly changes to the challenges that you face outside, monthly changes to, or even daily changes to the way your sales organization interacts with, as you mentioned, sales engineers, interacts with marketing and everything else as well. So how frequently do you go back to your strategy document? And you know what I mean? You know what I'm saying?
I do. I mean, I would say I'm constantly, or we, I shouldn't say just me, but we are constantly thinking about strategy. I think the big question when you have this sort of growth is how much change, how fast, right? If anything, I would say that we're less constrained by like what we want to do, and we're much more constrained by the capacity of the humans, of the people in the organization to actually accept that change. I think a really good example is, we for example changed the way we manage territories pretty dramatically this year. And that's another thing about scaling up, right? Is in the previous days we were effectively open territory, which meant any rep could grab any account in any of any size, well, of it, virtually any size, geography, and so on. And as long as they had been working it in the last 30 days, they could keep the account. And in order to control people from having every single account, we put a threshold of 100 accounts at a time. So, there are issues with that as you grow. And one of the big issues with that is that over time, what happens is that the existing reps have all the best accounts. And then when you hire new reps in, even if you hire great people in, their likelihood of success is dramatically diminished just because they're fishing in a much worse ocean. So we did the kind of Band-Aid rip, if you will, where we shifted territory from open territory to named accounts in order to provide equal opportunity territories. So like that's a complex thing to do when you're growing 100%. You don't want to disrupt your growth rate, which we did, we did manage to do, which I'm quite proud of. But what I'm getting at there is that like after doing that territory change, the capacity for driving additional change like in the organization becomes more limited, right? Because you've used up, and they need to think of it as a rechargeable battery, right? They are currently recharging their battery, and then we can make additional changes as we go forward. But we need to be very mindful about people's capacity to absorb the change.
That's very interesting, right? Because it's great when you're talking about this. So when you're talking about these accounts, you talked about the Band-Aid rip, and we're now talking about STRs where the customer has not yet formed a relationship with you. Now, how do you, because you're going to have the same kind of situation with your account executives at some point in time as well, because if they are taking care of your named accounts, even there, and then suddenly you say, well, this person, because we are growing at such a big rate, that this person now has more and more customers that they're taking care of. Now I'm talking of account executives, and then I need to better understand how you also do it after that as well. But let's say, for example, you have new people coming in, you need to make sure that if your SDRs are growing at some point in time, they need to be promoted to AEs, account executives. But then if you're again, as you start becoming bigger, as you start looking at more and more competition coming in as well, you're now all going to be fishing in the same pond kind of stuff. And you see that the account executives, again, you need to either move them up or you want to tell them that you're going to reduce the amount of customers that you have. So, which is what you're trying to do with your SDRs. But when you do with the AEs, how do your customers take to the fact that their point of contact now is changing? So I might build a relationship with my account executive, but now, hey, here's a new guy or girl. You know what I mean?
I do. I'll add, by the way, on that territory change, because we are, we are a system. The territory change actually affects SDRs. It affects account executives, and it affects sales engineering. So, it's the account executives who are assigned the accounts, and then we pair. So think of that as like I'm trying to think of in terms of Salesforce objects, I guess, but that the sort of owner, the master of that account is the account executive. And then because if things are going to change for them, this is that multi-part chess, right? Which is then you need to understand the implications of that and architect for that with sales development. You need to architect that for sales engineering and for whatever other functions exist within your company. And then, but to your question, then there is the whole world of what I would, of post-sale, right? Customer success, however that's defined. Some companies have full cycle AEs, right, where they both sell and renew the business. At SalesLoft, we have the kind of traditional SaaS segmentation of labor where our account executives are selling and then our customer success people and account managers are renewing. So on to your account management question, which, by the way, the territory change would have to be very, very different there. And I've been through that in multiple places as well. And you have to be incredibly more cautious on the existing customer side. So my recommendation is, or first a warning, which is never Band-Aid rip and shift territory with in the existing customer world. That is a tragically terrible thing to do and will kill your retention rate. What you need to do there is you need to articulate what your strategy is, where you want to end up, your end state, and then from that end state, you then need to, work backwards. And this is funny because I had this conversation precisely with our head of our post-sale business yesterday, and we both have, enough gray hair and he still has hair. I just have a bald head. We both have enough tenure to have experienced having seen it done the right way and the wrong way. And basically what you do there is you say, okay, if my end goal, let's say, is to have geographic territories or verticals or whatever, then if a CSM leaves, then you have no choice but to reassign. So you might as well reassign it to what your end state's going to be. Yeah. Or if you get a new customer, then you assign it to the right place. And that's usually, in my experience, it's this a patient thing. It's like growing trees. It's a 12 to 18 month, or at least small trees, I guess. Yeah. But it's a 12 to 18 month process, or maybe even 12 to 24 month process of migrating to your end state on the customer success or account management side. So very different approach if you're moving accounts there than if you're moving accounts on the pre-sale side.
Fantastic. So I think, because for me, the reason why I asked that question is it's not that I have an answer to it. The struggle for most organizations, for whatever reasons, right? So in your case was to make sure that everybody has an equal chance, has a good balanced territory, so that they can actually they have equal chances of making money, right? But in other cases, they could just have attrition. So suddenly, you see, I'm not interested in that. I'm more interested in saying, how do you take care of your customers? Because that's something that a lot of times we forget. And what I'm curious about right now is, which I like, you talk about the end state, right? So now, how do you define the end state? You see what I mean? Is that something that you get together as a group and say, okay, for these kind of customers, this is the end state that we want to be at? You see what I mean? Or is it something along the lines of, is it customer by customer? Is it by segment of customers? How do you define your end state?
I think practically it is by segment of customers, right? I mean, I don't think you could necessarily do it. I don't think you could do it customer by customer. Even in strategic accounts, it'd be very difficult. I mean, what you typically see is, you will have often, because the motions are different both on the pre-sale and the post-sale side, you'll have a different kind of go-to-market strategy on pre-sale, or you'll have a different service strategy on SMB versus mid-market versus larger enterprise. That's a pretty typical thing. And so I think the ultimate question you need to ask yourself is the motion different with respect to anything that you're working on? So for example, like, is the go-to-market motion different? And to be more specific about that, is like the way that you would try to secure a meeting at the very basic level, right, in the sales development world, is the way that you would try to secure a meeting different in SMB versus large enterprise? And yes, the answer there is yes, is that you probably can reach the CXO pretty directly at a smaller company, although they're inundated. If you're persistent and you're adding value and you're offering value, then you'll be able to get time with them. Whereas a large enterprise, you can be as persistent as you want, and if you're just trying to send emails and phone calls and whatever, like you're never going to get in there. You really need to network your way in, and or come up with a much more account-based approach that helps you get time with that senior exec. Like a good example of that is, if I was to try to get to a sort of top senior exec in a larger enterprise, I probably would have a number of conversations with their mid-level people to understand what that person was working on, because no senior exec wants to answer discovery questions. The senior execs want you to come to them having already done that homework and bringing them, hey, I understand from talking to XYZ people in your organization, these are the things that you are wrestling with. And I don't even think you need to confirm that, but you should probably confirm that. And then, got it. Okay, given that I'd like to just have a conversation with you about some potential ways to address that problem. And I think that conversation has to be much broader range in scope than just the product that you sell. Like, nobody wants you to do a disguised product pitch, or senior execs don't want you to do a disguised product pitch.
Indeed. I love this, because I think it again goes back to what we were discussing earlier, because your go-to-market strategy is also going to dictate, that's the end state, is going to dictate your end state, but also the activities you're going to do to achieve the end state, which then goes back into saying, okay, now how, as a manager, how do I coach my people towards being able to achieve those activities so that you can hit the end state that you're looking for as well. And I love this. So one of the things you said was how, depending upon how we segment our markets, right? So essentially you talk about segmentation, and a lot of times, what are your thoughts on this? Because I am of the belief that you, as an organization, we need to have structural marketing, business to business marketing. That is the idea of that, hey, whether we like it or not, our customers want to know that the people that they're talking to are experts in their industry. So whether we like it or not, we need to be talking about vertical specific expertise, right? You know what I mean? So that's the marketing part.
I do. Yeah. I think, again, I would just ask, generally, yes. I mean, I would still ask myself, is the motion different, right? So, if you work for a company that sells very horizontally, let's say you sell, a good example, I worked for Gartner for 16 years, right? So we sold, Gartner has broadened in recent years, but the main target customer for Gartner for many years was the chief information officer, or the directors of the various functions within IT. And there, the role itself is a much more horizontal role, in that the CIO of a financial services company, a large financial services company, large manufacturing company, large tech company, like there are some industry specific differences, but like there may be regulations and so on, but a lot of what they do is very horizontal, right? Like if they're building a data center, when people were migrating, to like virtualizing their data centers or modernizing their application infrastructure, like those things are very horizontal. So your marketing could, you could get away with marketing that was more horizontal in nature. So it really depends on, I think it depends on the nature of whether the motion and the language is different. And most of the time, obviously, it is.
Because I come from a kind of a world where we worked with companies where they were specific. So if you go into manufacturing, right, you have to sell something to manufacturing. And if I'm not talking to the CIO, because I look at CIO as a shared service.
Correct.
So you can talk about horizontal aspects of it in shared services, like HR, legal, and everything else. But the moment we go into specific expertise in terms of manufacturing, in terms of supply chains and everything else, that's going to be very, very specific for that industry. So the reason why I'm asking this question is that depending upon where you're selling is you need to have your salespeople need to be super people, because they need to be able to talk depending upon who they get on the phone. It could be that, yes, we may begin by thinking we're going to talk to the CIO, but it could be that the person making the decision, even for that, could be sitting somewhere else. So for example, I'll tell you, there was recent work that talked about the fact that the CIO's role is increasingly going to merge with the CMO's role. Now, we can go back and forth about whether this is right or not, but I've seen studies by Accenture that says that the CMO in the future has to be data savvy, has to understand the power of information that you're going to get from, captured sources, as well as all the things you can do based on social listening and everything else. So essentially, we do not know who we're going to get from a sales perspective. So the reason why I'm saying this is that you might need to have to equip your salespeople with both the horizontal and the vertical part of it.
I agree.
And that is where I think the challenge from a sales strategy perspective, because at the end of the day, the customer is not going to care whether you have a good marketing department that helps you with the content or not. All they're saying is, you have me on the phone, you asked for my time, And when I ask you questions, how prepared are you to answer my question? I'm not saying that a salesperson should lie, right?
I'm totally with you. I mean, the degree to which you can talk the industry language, even in horizontal roles, I think is important.
Exactly.
I would say that there's a couple of ways to address that, right? I mean, one is kind of whatever formal information you feed to people. In some ways, your people, I think that's in some ways less effective. I think you really want to try to hire people who have a passion for that vertical, so that in their off time, it's stuff that they're reading, right? I mean, when I hire sales managers, for example, I'll often ask them, what's the most recent sales book you've read, and tell me about it. And if they haven't read anything recently, then I don't know that they're really a student of the game. I want to talk to people who are curious and learning and interested. And the same thing, like in the manufacturing, selling into manufacturing, like if you don't really care about the cool stuff that happens in manufacturing, and then I don't know that you're ever going to get there, right? So I think the hiring piece is so important. I think there's another way to solve it though, which often does work, which is to pair sales executives with whatever you want to call them: solutions consultants, sales engineers, product specialists. So you pair them with those folks. That's especially important for newly hired account executives, right? So the ones who've been there for 3 to 5 years, they know the language, they've seen the problems that customers encounter, they know how to solve those problems, right? They can function more autonomously. But especially for the newer sales reps, I think pairing them with a product specialist or somebody who has that degree of expertise to come in there, and it's a win-win, because that's going to help the new salesperson learn faster, but it's also going to help you get the deal done.
Now, the reason why I was asking this question is, apart from this is pretty much what you do tactically as well, right? But also from a strategic viewpoint, essentially what we're trying to say is that we need to go more and more. So you're an engagement platform, but for you to engage with your customers as an organization, you also need to enable your salespeople, right? So I'm getting into, of course, for people from outside, not in the tech space, if I tell them sales engagement, if I tell them sales enablement, they say, well, what's the difference? It all looks the same.
Yeah. I was on the outside, and I took me a little while to wrap my head around the difference between those two things.
The reason why I'm at least talking this way is that I teach a class on sales technology now, and I have an artificial break between inbound, outbound, and sales enablement separately, even though for the common person, we all know that any inbound material that you have should be in the same content management system that you're going to use later on with your show pads, with your size mix, with your lesson leads and everything else, right? So essentially, from that viewpoint, but again, artificially we set boundaries so that we know what field we're playing in and everything else. But irrespective of whatever we do, this calls for, yes, we can have super account executives, but at the end of the day is that it's going to be so hard to get those people, or if they're so good, it's going to be very hard to keep those people. That how do you reconcile that sales and marketing? And this is something that different organizations work differently, but in an organization that is scaling up very fast, what role do you see marketing? When I'm talking of marketing, I'm talking both strategic as well as operational, tactical. What role does marketing play in working hand in hand with the sales organization?
I mean, you hit on one of the topics that I think has been very top of mind for folks the last couple of years, which is sales and marketing alignment in general. I think whether you're growing or not, I think those things can fall out of line. I've had the luxury of being, both CMO and CRO and now sales strategy roles. So I've sort of seen it from every angle. I do think you need, first of all, just regular conversations and interaction between sales and marketing is critically important. On the strategic side, I think it is to make sure that you're aligned on we talked a lot about segmentation, but to make sure that you're aligned kind of on segmentation. So our marketing team, for example, at SalesLoft, actually are the ones who define what the segments are and define which accounts are in those segments. And then they are also defining kind of what is the account-based strategy that we're going to use, or the go-to-market strategy, I should say, in each one of those segments, right? So in SMB, we have more of a broadcast strategy, And in mid-market, I would say we have a narrowcast strategy. And in the enterprise, we have whatever is the next evolution, like a pinpoint targeted strategy, right? And those three different kind of groups of strategies that are defined by the marketing team are ones that are executed in concert with the salespeople, right? And especially as you move up that stack, the involvement of sales is and interaction between sales and marketing grows and grows and grows.
Indeed.
To the point where like I get involved in a lot of the mid-market and enterprise related go to market, and they're right. I'm engaging with field marketing, for example, constantly, multiple times a week. I'll engage with them as we talk through specific customers and what we plan to do there.
Indeed. Because I think this is very, very fascinating from the viewpoint. The reason why I say as you scale up is the fact that the role of marketing when you're a smaller organization, marketing and sales may be in the same floor. And you'll have a chance to talk to them. But as you become bigger, you're going to see that the sales organizations could be spread out. You're going to have more and more challenges coming up. So essentially now you're focusing on small up and coming businesses yourself. Then you go into mid-market where the way you talk to the customers are going to be different. And you need to make sure that your marketing exactly knows what's happening with the pulse of the customers. And that's most of the time what I find is that marketing assumes certain things about what certain customers want. And because of the fact that you've grown so big and you have new hires coming in who do not have the same kind of relationship that they've had in the past, and because your processes are developing, that's why for me it's very interesting from an up and coming, rapidly growing organization, because in bigger organizations, if I go to a Procter & Gamble, if I go to Unilever, processes are set, are established. You come in where you say marketing says, this is the case, this is the brand positioning, this is what we need to be doing. We cannot waver on these messages. And we are going to spend a lot of money on doing research about our end customers, and we're going to feed it into the sales force. Contrast that with organizations where the market is changing so fast that the salespeople are constantly in touch, and marketing just does not have the resources to go out there and find out what is happening. And suddenly what happens because of that disconnect, salespeople do not start taking marketing seriously. So
yeah, it's very common. And one thing as you were talking that through that I think is a critical problem that people have is that marketing will do, even if they are having those conversations, marketing tends to take their messaging to a level of abstraction that's one step higher than the salespeople feel comfortable describing. Right? It's more aspirational in nature. And then salespeople, if you then, and it's longer, by the way, that I think salespeople are comfortable with. So I do think it's critical that if, as marketing is involved in messaging and messaging development, that there are those iterations that they do with the sales team, where the sales team says, like, yes, I understand what you're, I need your help. Yes, I understand what you're doing. We need to take this to something that I, as a salesperson, would feel comfortable having come out of my mouth, or I, as a salesperson, would feel comfortable sending in an email, both in terms of content and in terms of length.
I love this. So you are SVP of sales strategy, right? Do you have another SVP of marketing strategy, or is it you are responsible for both marketing and sales?
We don't have a marketing. Well, we have a CMO, right? So she I would say that like she probably is serving that function herself. Within sales, we have a CRO. He's super smart dude. It's just a bandwidth thing. So there's a number of us that kind of work as a group on strategy problems. I do help a bit with our customer success strategy because it's so related, pre-sale and post-sale. And then on marketing, I will chime in for, what do I call it? I chime in from the peanut gallery, and we'll make suggestions and things like that. But I will say that the marketing team is, I mean, it's hard to pick, besides the sales team, but favorite teams. I love interacting with. You can see the smile light up on my face. I love interacting with the marketing folks. Funny sidebar. So we have Slack, like many companies do, and we name our Slack channels, our internal Slack channels, sort of like SalesLoft. So for example, SalesLoft is our pet oriented Slack channel where people post pictures of their pets. So again, sidebar, funny story, but SalesLoft has been dominated by the dog lovers. And so there's another one called Marketing Pets, which is another Slack channel that we have. So I've been named an honorary member of Marketing Pets, and Marketing Pets is where all the cat lovers are. So I happen to be I love dogs too, but I have a cat and I love my cat. So I'm now an honorary member of Marketing Pets.
So do you, one of the things that we always hear, so essentially there's a fantastic article that we teach in our classes. It's called Ending the War Between Marketing and Sales. It's a Harvard Business Review article written by Phil Kotler, the father of marketing, and Neil Rackham from Spin Selling. So, and they get together and they give a kind of a template. And one of the things they suggest is that to have better coordination, to what extent do you mandate or say some of your account executives that they have to go sit in on meetings in marketing? Getting the permission of CMO, because that is one way by which you can bust silos. We talked about busting silos earlier, so not in a meeting earlier when we talked yesterday, right? So to what extent, because I do not know if you can control whether you can get the marketing people to come in and sit in on your SDRs and your AE roles, because unless each one of them have been in the shoes of the other, you will never truly understand what the other person is doing, what the other person is saying. So my question to you is that something that you have seen happen in other companies, or something that you could mandate yourself with your
It's interesting. It's an interesting idea. So I'll start by saying I have not actually seen that. What I have seen, a great example here at SalesLoft, is that our CMO and our CRO, they have a daily sync. So they talk every single day. So at least at the executive level, right, we are aligned on sales and marketing strategy. So I think that I think is critically important. What I have not seen is a rigorous and ongoing cadence of marketing people sitting in sales meetings, or vice versa, salespeople sitting on marketing meetings. I think it's a reasonable idea, but I feel like having that be a regular thing might not be efficient. Like I think if there's new messaging being developed, to have a cross-functional team assembled for the purpose of developing that messaging, with salespeople, with marketing people, with whomever on that team, product people probably, also engineers. Like I think having that cross-functional team develop that messaging would be a project-based thing, rather than just a sort of ongoing thing. Because I could imagine getting, just not being a good use of anyone's time to be in there every week.
I mean, I think that's one of the things that I sort of learned, but I actually buy into that idea. So I think that's pretty much where, because at the end of the day, what we're looking at is that if at some point, it's also the formal thing that you do, but it's also the informal networks that you create. As you become bigger, you're going to get a message from marketing from a person that you might not even know. And the question is, do we trust that person? And a lot of time is wasted, in my opinion, compared to the fact that periodically all you need is that one or two. So you rotate your account executive things to say, okay, this week it's this person, but this person goes in and then during a sales meeting does a debrief. So it's effective use of everyone's time, but you at least have a finger on the pulse of what is happening with marketing, what's happening with the CRO. That's great. But in most organizations that I've worked with, it is never an issue between top management. The issue always comes down at the grassroots level, where they would say, I love what you're saying, but you have never been in the trenches. So this is typically what you hear from sales.
Yeah, I might be more likely to put a first line sales manager in than I would be to put an individual account executive, simply because I definitely live by the mantra that the company's sales success lives and dies by what the first line managers do. And I think it's not just sales. I think it's true everywhere. And if their first line sales managers are not bought in and executing whatever the program is, the process is, then the reps won't do it either.
I think this is really, I think I spot on. It's unbelievable how much money companies spend on training their salespeople. But if you ask first line sales managers, the idea is that, hey, we have a budget and we can choose wherever we want to go train. And most of the time, these people are so busy that they don't end up getting trained. I think I love what you're saying out there. And I think, again, this is something that we can go on and on, but the interest of time, I'm going to ask one last question. And at that point in time, after that, we might have to cut it short.
Sure.
At this point in time, there's this move right now that says more and more that your SDRs should go and report to your CMOs or to the folks in marketing, right? Because SDRs are part of lead generation and everything else, and along with all the marketing activities. What are your thoughts on this one?
I mean, I guess I'd have to look at the trend to see whether that is actually changing. I know that a few companies like the Bridge Group and Topo and others put out studies every couple of years. My recollection from the latest studies is, I want to say it's like 10% report into other functions, 30% report into marketing, and about 60% reported to sales. The usual guidance on that one, if what most people say is it should report into the person or people best equipped to manage the function, whether they're in sales or in marketing. I do think that there's I do have an opinion about this, having been on both sides. I feel that sales development should report into sales, but I do think that there should be a very strong SLA to ensure that 100% of leads, particularly inbound leads, get followed up on within 5 minutes. So the reason I say that is just because the alignment between the SDR and the AE is so critical that I think they should be, that even the subtlety of kind of where their ultimate reporting structure is. And then there's another reason which is really important that a lot of people miss, which is that a lot of the ROI involved with actually even having SDRs to begin with is not only on the pipeline that they help generate, but also on training SDRs to become account executives, so who can hit the ground running and hit quota quickly. And I think if you're in the sales organization, you're much more likely to create SDRs who do that, as opposed to SDRs who are in the marketing organization. I've just seen that. I've seen that a few times. So yeah, I mean, yes, it's true. You should have them report to the best, whatever. But in terms of that, again, in terms of the ROI of developing them, and then in terms of the alignment to the salespeople, I think they should be in sales, but with a caveat that SLA needs to be in place, that 100% of leads get engaged within less than 5 minutes.
And I really like your answer there. That's me. I'm not saying that this is pretty much good. I completely agree. I never thought about the fact that when you have an SDR and you start asking them to report to the marketing organization, but there should be a connect between the SDR and the AE.
Yes.
When they're reporting to different people, they're talking about different KPIs, and suddenly you're not going to have the same handover, because they say, I would love to do all of these, but my marketing manager says I have to generate so many leads. So I don't take the time to fill out all the necessary details, because that means that I'm taking time. So the handover might not happen very well. You may tend to lose that. And I'd never thought of that angle, and I love what you just said. But if you were to remain SDRs, that you're still going to be remaining in the sales organization, I love the idea of the SLAs.
Absolutely.
This time, that is pretty much where we saw things happening, where I've talked to companies where the marketing team would generate leads, and because of history, where a lot of time would not be spent in pre-qualifying those leads and everything else, salespeople would not take it seriously.
Yeah, I've seen that. I've seen a bit on. So, I was a CMO at a time where, like, when I walked into the CMO role, 50% of leads were not followed up on. This was at a prior company, and it was shocking to me. But the good news is what the good news was, I was able to have a big impact by moving that from 50 to 100.
I love that, and I think that the only reason why that should not happen is, the only reason that is acceptable, not in the long run, is because you don't have enough number of salespeople to follow up.
Yeah, fair, but that was not the case.
I think that sometimes people forget that part, and I always say it's not always that salespeople do not want to follow up on what marketing brings in, but it becomes a sales management issue. And again, going back to your first frontline sales model, you're saying, do we have adequate resources to actually follow up on all these leads? So I'm assuming that apart from the SLA, which is going to make it happen, but you also need to make sure that you have very rigorous sales managers in place who will take a look at resource allocation and even decide how many people that they have as well.
Agreed.
Jeremy, thank you so much. This is all the time that we have. Again, I'm excited when I talk to a lot of very, very smart people, and I get ideas and I get fired up. So thank you so much for your time. And I look forward to, again, continuing talking with you on other channels as well. And hopefully we can stay connected as well.
It was a blast, Eva.
Yeah, thank you so much.